Hello, is that Uwe?
Yeah, on the phone. Hello.
Hi, it's Joe from Red Bull Music Academy. How are you?
Good, good. Thanks. How are you?
I'm not bad, thank you. Are you free to talk for 15, 20 minutes or so?
Sure, sure. Yeah, yeah. I was waiting for your call.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Okay, so just to go straight into it, do you recall the first time you met Pete Namlook? I read that it was at the POD Communications office. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, and can you remember?
I met
Go on.
Peter. This was maybe. Let me think about it. This was around 91 or 92.
Okay,
Pete had released a couple of things with POD, and actually the guy who ran it, Olaf Finkbeiner, was a very good friend of mine. I went to school with him, and he was quite important in my musical, I don't know, path taking, let's say.
yeah,
So I had worked with Olaf and with POD, and Pete had worked with them, and I don't, and I, the POD office was like around the corner from where I lived, so I went there like almost every day and just hang out and say hello and stuff. And Pete was sitting there on a sofa, and we got introduced,
yeah,
and like Pete always, and I hadn't listened to actually what Pete had done,
yeah,
like this 12-inch or something. I didn't really know his music up until this point. Um, and Pete was always very he was very very selective with people.
okay,
He had a very, compared to maybe the common sense of how people are, I would say, he had a very high standard of I don't know what he expected from people,
yeah,
how to behave and what to do and what not to do. He was really harsh with people misbehaving, or like the smallest, how would you say, the smallest sign of like betrayal
yeah,
or misbehavior, or like if you did like weird stuff behind his back or stuff like that. People
yeah.
sometimes in this scene especially are doing this. He would immediately cut ties with people.
Right.
Like,
Okay.
and we met, and I think he had really admired what he had heard from me, some stuff I had done, and yeah, we had a very good like chemistry, I would say. Like I remember us back at the office, like
Yeah.
so, and
Yeah.
then he released. I mean, Pete. The thing was, Pete had come from a more like jazz background.
Yeah.
He had played like in jazz combos. He was a very, very good guitar player, and wanted to. Well, he was always open to new music and make different stuff. And he ended up in this whole like techno electronic bubble in Frankfurt. I don't know how or why.
Yeah.
But right before that, he had worked at a bank, you
Yeah.
know. And then he decided to make music and release records. And then he was very like sharp, and he looked at the whole scenery laying in front of him, like who is doing, what is the label doing, what is the artist doing,
Yeah.
from a very like economical angle, like who is doing what and how well. And after like having released like maybe 3 or 4 EPs with labels, he was like, yeah, fuck you, I can do it myself,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Okay.
So he pretty much was like, what's the difficulty here? Like, and most labels actually are really up, and I can even say up until today, a lot of labels are really really inefficient.
Yeah.
Um, and they take especially back then, they took like a huge portion of your money,
Yeah.
doing a relatively shitty job. And he was like, well, I can do that, and we make 50-50. That was his
Yeah.
we don't need these other people. So immediately, like after this very short experience within this scene, he decided to make a record label himself.
Yeah.
And like he was like completely like coming from a very like banking background, like a more like economical background. Like he
Yeah.
had this very strongly, more than other people. He just crashed the numbers, and he was like, okay, there's no mystery to that. I can do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And
and then he approached me and asked me if I wanted to release for him.
yeah, okay. And so obviously the rather interesting label that started in '94, is that right?
Yeah,
So how did that come about? Did you suggest that to him, or did he suggest that to you? And how did it fit in with Fax?
well, I had up until this point, I had released a couple of things with him,
Yeah,
like my own music, and we had worked together on things. And he was Pete was a very, I would say, in his artistic and economical decisions, a very solitary person. I would say he didn't trust too many people.
right.
And I think up until this point, I've never analyzed it really, but we had worked together and we saw each other relatively often. And I think I was one of the very few people from the artist background, like from the more like creative background, who had always complied with what we had agreed upon.
Yeah,
Like I would always show up on time. I would never like pull out of something I had said or some stuff like that.
Yeah.
He was very, really sensitive about this kind of stuff. Like he wouldn't, for example, want to deal with like this typical like artist cliche kind of person who is like fuzzy about things and
yeah,
being like a little diva and all that kind of stuff. He was like, I'm not into that.
yeah,
If you don't comply with what you say, if you don't do what you, then he was not interested in working with you.
yeah,
And we had worked together for a couple of years, and he once said to me like, when he offered me. He saw that I was making a lot of music and a lot of stuff he liked, and which was not music he would have done or he would necessarily want to do on his label, maybe.
yeah,
But he saw that I was really creative and really efficient and keeping my promises and delivering whatever. If I said I sent you the master tomorrow, I sent you the master tomorrow. I'm not like,
yeah,
and he was really like that. He had like his whole thing was really like a clockwork, So after a couple of years, he then said he looked at what I was doing and how I was doing it and with whom, and he said, you should do your own label. Like you do so many things, and you don't. I also told him it's like more work for me to sell an album to a record company than actually making it.
yeah,
It takes like 2 weeks to make an album and then like 4 months to find a label.
yeah,
And it's released after a year and it's like really not efficient,
yeah,
And then he then offered. He said to me, "Yeah, why don't you make a label? You can. The whole artistic side is yours. You fill it with whatever you want, music and artwork and whatever you want to do. But here's the deal." And then he explained to me how he wants to do it, like really technically, like how to deliver the master, how to deliver the artwork, in which format, and the barcode, and really like this is the whole technical side of it, delivery.
yeah,
This is how it needs to be. Like he would not be very keen on me like making little mistakes or
Right.
whatever. If you would send the audio in a wrong file format,
Yeah. Yeah.
he would totally freak out about it. Like
Right.
I have to deliver in like 4 minutes, and what's going on, you know. But in general, he really appreciated, and we really worked on this level like really well together. Like he said, okay, I need everything on the 20th of March, and by 4 p.m.
Yeah.
And I would deliver everything by that time and that date, and then he would like press a button and it would be manufactured.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he would like as well like totally like comply. He would like we have the product back in 2 weeks and blah blah. It was all like really the whole manufacturing side and all. It was really mechanical.
Yeah.
For him, like this whole thing, and he really wanted to reduce that whole the administration and all that, which is a real headache actually. Like making royalty statements and all that was like really mechanical on his side. And he had it designed like really smoothly, and he didn't want to think about it too much. Basically, that he offered me, to run the label for him. on the whole, the administration and manufacturing and all that, and he would pretty much like just trust me on the content.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
And it was a really, really big step forward for me because, like I said, up until this point I had to basically find a record company for each single release, which was and still is a real pain in the ass actually. If you you have to kind of like convince people. In a way, it's a little bit like that. Especially for the kind of music I was doing, or in general I'm doing, which is not like commercial music, So I really appreciated. He kind of like opened like the creative flow for me. Like I could just make stuff and send it to him, and he would release it.
Yeah, cool. So obviously you produced music alongside him as well. Was he very efficient in the studio as well? Was he very focused and sort of time conscious and so on, or was it more sort of improvisation?
No, both things. He would be really, really efficient. For my taste, maybe a little bit too efficient. I have to say, like as a criticism, maybe, or like a thing that was something I did not appreciate that much. I mean, I appreciate things being on time and people showing up and all that.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was a little bit too mechanical in that sense. But he would assign a certain amount of time for our work.
Yeah.
And we would both have a certain aim in mind in terms of what we wanted to achieve and how we wanted to achieve it, and then we just like play around and do it.
Yeah.
And he would also like very much. I think he did this with me and with a lot of other people as well. He did stuff like he would have a new synthesizer, and in this old studio, in the first studio.
Yeah.
And he would say, "Oh, here I have this new synth. Why don't you play around with it? I go and cook something in the kitchen," which was next door.
Yeah.
And he hadn't told me that he had a tape running.
Okay, right.
So he was in the other room, and he had monitors in the other room. Like he would listen in the kitchen what was happening in the studio, and so I would like fiddle around and play around with it. And as it is, I mean, especially if you have a new piece of gear and you don't know, it's a very creative moment.
Yeah.
But you're not really in the mode, and you don't really want to create something. You want to play around. But every now and then you just come across something where you go like, "Oh, actually, I should have recorded that." But now it's gone, And he would just like record me fiddling around for an hour.
Right. Okay.
And make mental notes in the kitchen, like, this was a good part. And then he would come back from the kitchen, and I would say, "Yeah, it's a really nice machine." And I wish we had recorded. And he was like, "Yeah, I did record it." And then he would go back, and we would listen to a portion and sample a part or take a part out and build something around it.
Yeah.
He did that kind of stuff very often. Like he was really spontaneous.
Yeah.
In that sense, but very often he would not want to. He really appreciated like this idea of the creative moment, like what we had created in that moment. That's what he wanted to preserve.
Yeah.
So very often, I had the urge to go back to what we did and make it better, for example.
Yeah.
And he would not agree. He would not agree upon that. He was like, "No, that's the way it's gonna be."
Right. Okay.
And very often, this was a little bit frustrating for me because I have a different approach on how I make music.
Yeah.
And sometimes it was a little bit. I had to convince. Like it was a lot of like convincing him to. No, I really want to go back to that section and do it again. And very often he wasn't like really into that idea. And like the majority of the cases, we just kept it the way he wanted it.
Yeah.
Which maybe looking back at it long term, like from today's perspective, was probably okay because.
Yeah.
If I listen to it today, I wouldn't remember what was good or bad. Like this category totally disappears after a while.
Yeah.
But in the moment, it was very often a little bit frustrating for me to having to confront, him on this topic. I really want to go back and do this again.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't want to.
Okay. So did he? I mean, was it just a case of a short attention span that he had for things, or was it more that he just wanted to? He had too many ideas and he didn't want to dwell on one and then let others get pushed to the side.
I think it had something to do with his idea of efficiency.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
like he had a very. I think Pete was probably, or probably still is the only person I knew who had a more rigid mindset than I have.
Okay.
You know, like I know a lot of people who are really like in the creative process and in the surrounding other processes.
Yeah.
Rigid in that sense, as you have in the sense as you have an idea, and that's how you want to do it, and that's how you're going to do it. And especially in collaborations, sometimes this can be complicated.
Yeah.
You know, and he was. But whenever I approach a collaboration, for example, with Tetsu or with other people I worked with, usually I want my idea is I want to leave this aside, my rigidness. Like
Yeah.
I'm interested in the other person's process, you know.
Yeah.
And for Pete, it was always like, okay, this is how I want to do it. And if you get along, great.
Yeah.
If you don't get along, I will not do it with you. You know? And there were a lot of people he worked with like once or twice, and he didn't really like what they did or how they did it.
Yeah.
Or vice versa. Other people that worked with him couldn't just comply with his, you know, idea or his style of working.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this has obviously good and bad sides. On the good side, I think he was like super. Like working with him on that in that aspect, under this aspect was like really a really positive experience, you know, because we were just getting together, and then he would like try to enable that creative moment, sort of like here's the studio, just feel comfortable, and then let's do something. And he was very receptive as well. Like I would always, of course, do stuff with his equipment he would not have done with his equipment.
Yeah.
Like he was very, very conscious about who he was collaborating with could contribute what exactly. Like when he worked with Klaus Schulze, for example.
Yeah.
He did with Klaus exactly what Klaus was able to do with him. You know.
Yeah.
He would not request anything different from him than what you think he would be able to do. And it was a little bit the same with me. Like I think what he saw in me was more like this this weird guy who's like violating equipment in a way.
Yeah.
Like I would never approach a synthesizer the way he would approach it. Like he had a very much more classical and traditional perspective on equipment than I had. You know? Like he would buy a certain synth for a certain idea in the same way he would work with a certain musician for a certain idea. Like he would work with, like I said, with Klaus Schulze or Bill Laswell.
Yeah.
Working with them as these personas, which they are, not trying to do something completely different with them, but they're exactly that. You know, Klaus Schulze is exactly Klaus Schulze, and he's doing what he's always doing.
Yeah.
And I was that guy who did like weird things with equipment, and he really appreciated. He really enjoyed that. Like he was always like I said, he would give me like a new synth he had just bought, and something I hadn't seen, and then he would like look at me like, okay, what is he gonna do with it?
Yeah.
And I usually did like lots of like weird things with it, and and this was something he could not do himself.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, every individual, every human being is like himself or herself, and there is no point in trying to become somebody else in that sense.
Yeah. Like
he would never have tried to do what I've done with his equipment, like by himself. That's why I was there, you know.
Yeah.
So, and in that sense, he was like very conscious of the whole process and with whom he was doing what and how and what for. And yeah, he was, I think, probably the most. This very interesting way of being creative in a very sober way.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like really, really super consciously looking upon the whole process and much more than any other musician or any artist I know, including myself.
Yeah, yeah.
Most musicians I know or I've worked with are rather unconscious of their own creative moment, and
Yeah.
you don't know who you are or what you're doing or how you're doing it. And he was really a nice mirror in that sense.
Yeah, yeah.
Like he would bring out yourself in the process, working with him.
Yeah. Obviously, he had an incredible synth collection. Was there a particular piece of equipment that he had that you were like very envious of? A particularly rare piece, or?
Well, he had probably all the rare pieces you could be envious of, I think. The thing is that I've never been a synth collector. Like, I never really engaged on that level with technology.
Yeah.
In that sense, we're both like really different, because I had a very strong, or I still have a very strong belief in reduction, also reduction of resources, and especially when we work together. And shortly after, maybe, like in the early 2000s, like as an example, he had like this huge studio with like, I know, hundreds of synths.
Yeah.
And I was making music with a laptop. I had like sold all my gear I was working on a laptop for 10 years.
Yeah.
Very consciously, I didn't want to have any other piece of equipment than Pro Tools.
Mm.
And I didn't really. I could have done the same with Pete, like just with one synth, or like, this was not like, I didn't really care so much about the gear itself.
Yeah.
But the way he had set up his studio, it was necessary to use all the gear he had because of the way he had set it up.
Right.
I would work. My workflow was very different from his. Like, I would make the music which was equally complex or complicated than he did, with almost no equipment, just like layering the same equipment over and over. And he didn't like that. He didn't like to go back to recording and overdub and overdub and overdub and edit and overdub. He didn't do that,
Yeah.
He would very much go like, here's the idea, let's outline the idea. And he would hit record, and then we do one take or 3 takes, and he would use one of those takes.
Right, okay.
And that was very different from what I or how I work, And I really liked that difference, of course. Working with him, it was not what I could do in my studio or what I was looking for.
So it was a lot of live work he was doing, the kind of live dub style that he was. That was the way he was working
always.
with it. Yeah.
Yeah, always. Yeah, and probably if you ask other musicians he had worked with, the few I have spoken to report the same style. Basically, you come to the studio and he would go like, "Oh, here's my studio. Choose some instruments, and how do you want to do it?" And he would let you play around and like program some stuff.
Yeah.
And when he thinks there was an idea, he would like come up with his side of the idea.
Yeah.
And pretty much then you would rehearse a little bit. You would play around with what was running live, and get a feel for what you want to do and how you want to do it. Then basically you talk about it very briefly, and then hit a record, and that's it.
Yeah. I mean, was he sort of shifting over to software, obviously, as soft synths came in and people, people have less and less synths now, and they can do everything inside a laptop that they could with 400 synths 20 years ago. Was he moving away from hardware and towards software, do you think? Or do you think he'd have always stayed loyal to hardware?
He, as far as I could see it, the last couple of years before he passed, we hadn't really been in touch that much.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen him many years, and he had moved studios to a new studio I had never seen. But every now and then we like briefly spoke about things, and he sent me pictures from the studio, and he still had like this huge collection of hardware.
Yeah.
And I think he was looking upon software more like an add-on. Like he was really looking into software that would be able to do stuff differently from the hardware he had.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Like he would never, for example, get rid of a reverb unit, hardware reverb unit, because there was a soft emulation of that. He would not do that. He would like, no. That's the real deal. Then he would like look into other things that software could do that probably he would not be able to do with any piece of hardware.
Yeah.
It was a little bit more like that. I think he never sold hardware in order to replace it with the software equivalent. He didn't do that, no. But he was like always very open to any kind of technology, like software, hardware, and he was like constantly like expanding everything, you know.
Yeah. Obviously, he's left behind a huge back catalogue, hundreds of releases. Do you think that can be a little bit sort of intimidating for newcomers? It's kind of hard to know where to start, and there's all the color coding, and there's all the coding, and so on. And where would you sort of recommend somebody started with Pete's back catalogue?
Well, to be honest, I have myself lost oversight of his catalog, because I mean, when I was still living in Frankfurt and he was still living in Frankfurt, and we saw each other quite often, a couple of times a month, and he was living close, so I could like just drive by and say hello, and he would always pass me, and he would constantly like release stuff like every week, you know, and it was so many things that I still have almost everything he gave me, that I totally lost oversight. As you said, like, I made a new label and it's a different color coding, and I was like, okay, I got lost. I don't know what's going on. I'm more like I never, because I'm not a collector either. I'm not. For me, it was a very natural process of him like passing me stuff, and like it is between friends, you just, oh, look what I did, and I've done this. So I never really organized his music in my archive, so I'm probably more lost than anybody who has spent time with his, thinking about his catalog. Okay. So I really, there's really nothing I can recommend. There's of course things I didn't like, and stuff I like more than others. But it's really especially then the very first phase when he released like limited edition vinyls and all that, and like re-released and like recompiled and remastered and blah blah blah. It's it's pretty massive. So I don't know really.
Okay, cool. So finally, what's your favorite memory of Pete, of your time with him?
My favorite memory is, I think, his humor. He was a very, like I said before, like in the sense as that he was very analytical. He was a very good. He was a very good person to as a friend to ask. I mean, he was a little bit older than I am. So he had gone through a little bit more, and he, in a way, he was like a couple of steps ahead. Like whenever something happened to me, and I would ask him for his opinion. I would always get like really, really good comments from him, and help, and he was certainly like there for one, and he was one of the few people in the business, if you look at it from the business side of things. I could totally rely to, like, I never had any doubt about anything he was doing. And so I could simply, like, apart from the business side or the creative side, I would, for example, visit him in the office for like a very technical thing, and he would be very sensitive to what the other one was like feeling, and somebody would come in his studio, and he would say, "Oh, what happened? How are you? What's the problem today?" And he would go, "I don't know." And you would tell him about a problem, and he would like immediately like listen to it and take it seriously and give you his feedback.
Yeah.
And very, very often, like what he would say would be like totally like spot on. Like most of the times, that everything when he had thought something through, it really was. You could take it seriously what he was saying.
Right. Okay.
And not only with a serious part of life.
Yeah.
Like he could be really serious and but also like having a good time with him in the studio, making fun. We had the same kind of humor.
Yeah.
In a way. So yeah, and I really miss that. How do you say that portion of the universe? Like somebody said recently to me, like friends are in one's life, so they show you something else of the universe, something else you don't know.
Yeah.
And you have no access to, so because I often ask myself, if you think about friends or people that are in your life or have been in your life, like why, what's the function, so to speak, of that person, in your life. And it's, as a matter of fact, I think it's quite true that like every friend or every person you know is kind of like reflecting a different side of the universe, which you by yourself are unable to see. Yeah. And Pete was very much like that. Like much clearer to me, thinking about him. Then it was very clear to me, or today it is very clear to me, what his role was in my universe, at least. What he was like giving me, or what he was reflecting back to me, and he was very, very, very unique in that sense. I don't know anybody else like him. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, that's probably what I miss. What I miss about him.
Yeah. Okay, that is fantastic, Uwe. Thank you so much for speaking with me today. The piece is going to go live, I think, end of next week. So I'll send a link through so that you can take a look at it.
Yeah. With whom else have you spoken?
I've sent questions to Richie Horton, not received them back yet, but apparently we are getting them back. Spoke to David Maufang. Spoke to Bill Laswell yesterday. And who else? I put a request into Mixmaster Morris, but he's not got back to me yet. But so yeah, those four so far, including you.
Ah, cool.
Yeah. Cool. Anyone else you suggest?
Nice. Well, actually, my colleague and label partner, Andre Rello.
Okay.
I'm making a label with him called No. He is working under the name of Material Object. Yeah. And he was the one who called me and said that Peter died that day. Yeah. He had a very, very close contact the last 5 years with Pete, and he was making artwork for Fax.
Oh, right. Okay.
He was doing most of the artwork for the last 3-5 years for Pete.
Yeah. Okay.
And he had spent much more time with Pete than I had these last years.
Yeah.
Okay. I can recommend his input.
Yeah, please. Have you got an email address for him at all that I could drop him a line on at all?
Yes, let me just quickly open my computer. Yes, it's me, M-E.
Yeah, M-E, yeah.
At.
Yeah.
S-S, like double S.
Yeah.
G-R-F-K.
G-R-F-K, yeah.
.com. It's me at ssgrfk.com.
And that's Andrew Rello, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic. Thanks so much for that. I'll drop him a line tonight and see if he's if he's up for a
Yeah,
chat.
he's living in Australia.
Okay.
So he is like 12 hours off or something.
Yeah, literally the opposite from me. Okay, but yeah, we'll sort something out. Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you for your help with that. Yeah, and I'll send the finish. I'll send the finish link over to you end of next week.
Super.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Great.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye bye.